At my daughter's wedding reception, her new husband stood up with a microphone in front of 200 guests and called me worthless, a low-class nobody who worked dead-end jobs his whole life. What Trevor didn't know was that I'm Ronald Mitchell Hayes, founder and CEO of TechBridge Solutions, the billion-dollar tech firm that signed his paycheck every 2 weeks for 4 years. 72 hours later, I sat at the head of the executive boardroom table in a tailored suit he'd never seen me wear, watching his face drain of color as security waited by the door. What would you do if someone publicly destroyed you at the most sacred moment of your life? Have you ever been called worthless by someone who had no idea who you really were? Has anyone disrespected your parent in front of your eyes and you froze? This isn't about money or power, it's about dignity, respect, and what happens when arrogance meets consequence. Stay with me to find out how one father taught an entitled corporate climber that respect isn't inherited, it's earned and lost in seconds. Before we start, hit that like button and subscribe. You're about to witness the most satisfying justice story you'll hear this year. Let me take you back 28 years to a garage in Austin where everything began. He started with nothing but a beat-up laptop and a promise he made to himself at 3 a.m. His daughter would never struggle like he did. It was 1997, and I was living in a one-bedroom apartment in downtown Austin with a garage that smelled worse than it looked. The concrete floor was cracked. Oil stains spread across it like dark continents on a map, and the single overhead bulb buzzed loud enough to keep me awake even when exhaustion tried to drag me under. I had one desk, a door laid across 2 filing cabinets, and a laptop that took 5 minutes to boot up. That was TechBridge Solutions in the beginning. That was everything I owned that mattered. I worked 16-hour days, sometimes 18. I'd code until my eyes burned and my fingers cramped, survive on gas station, coffee, and whatever I could microwave in 30 seconds. Sleep came on the office couch, a sagging thing I'd dragged from a curb on trash day. Holidays passed without celebration. Birthdays came and went unmarked. My wife Linda gave me an ultimatum one night in October. You're married to your work, not me. She wasn't wrong. A month later, she packed her bags and left. Olivia was 5 years old, still small enough to fit in my lap, still young enough to believe her daddy could fix anything. Linda walked out that door and never looked back. And suddenly, I was a single father with a startup that barely paid rent and a daughter who asked every night when mommy was coming home. The garage reeked of motor oil and burnt coffee, harsh fluorescent light buzzing overhead while I coded until dawn. Olivia's baby monitor crackling beside my keyboard, every keystroke a promise I was building for her. I remember Linda's perfume sometimes, when I'm working late. Jasmine and something sweeter. It used to linger on my work shirts long after she stopped touching me. That scent became a ghost, a reminder of intimacy I'd traded for ambition, for lines of code that might become something, for a future I couldn't yet see but believed in anyway. I was building TechBridge to prove her wrong, to prove I could be something, to prove my daughter wouldn't grow up the way I did, hungry, forgotten, worth nothing to anyone. I made a promise that night as I changed Olivia's diaper at 4 a.m. between debugging code. She'd never know hunger, never know abandonment, never question her worth. 23 years later, a man would make her doubt everything and I'd make him pay. Drop A if you've ever sacrificed everything for someone you love. While other CEOs bought mansions and Ferraris, Ronald drove a rusted truck and lived in the same apartment because wealth without humility is just noise. 5 years after Linda left, TechBridge wasn't a garage operation anymore. We had an office in Dallas, then Houston, then Phoenix. Contracts started coming in, not the small-time stuff, but real money. 6 figures became 7 figures became 8. By the time Olivia turned 15, We were handling contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. My name was on deeds to glass towers that reflected Texas sunlight like monuments to everything I'd built. But I never told her. Not the full truth, anyway. She knew I worked in tech. She knew I ran a company. But she didn't know that the building downtown with 19 floors and floor-to-ceiling windows belonged to me. She didn't know my signature was on contracts with Fortune 500 companies. She didn't know that the 2003 Ford First Drove had $250,000 sitting in the bank while I wore jeans from outlet malls and boots I'd resold 3 times. The downtown glass towers bore my name on every deed, reflecting Texas sunlight like monuments to ambition, while I parked my 2003 Ford in the employee lot and took the stairs to avoid questions. I kept it quiet because I wanted Olivia to grow up normal, grounded. I wanted her to understand that character matters more than capital, that humility is strength, not weakness. I wanted her to choose friends who liked her, not what she could give them. I wanted her to fall in love with someone who saw her value, not her father's bank account. I raised her alone, taught her to ride a bike in the park near our apartment, attended every school play, sat in auditoriums filled with other parents while she sang off-key in a costume I'd stitched together the night before. Read her bedtime stories until she was old enough to roll her eyes and tell me she could read herself. Women showed interest sometimes. I'd meet them at coffee shops or business conferences, and they'd smile at just a tech guy with kind eyes and worn boots. But I always said no. Olivia and my work, that was enough. The loneliness was a choice, a sacrifice I made willingly. Love felt like a luxury I couldn't afford, not when everything I had needed to go toward building something that would last. Around 2019, we started hiring again. New blood, ambitious project managers climbing corporate ladders with polished resumes and expensive suits. I barely noticed their names. They were just employee numbers, faces in meetings, people my HR department vetted and hired. Trevor Morrison was one of them. I thought hiding my success would protect her from gold diggers and greed. I never considered it might leave her vulnerable to men who saw her as beneath them. Would you hide your wealth to keep your kids grounded? Tell me in the comments. Trevor walked into TechBridge with a polished smile and manufactured ambition, the kind of man who knew exactly what to say until he got what he wanted. He was hired as a mid-level project manager in 2020. Nothing special on paper. Business degree from a decent school. 5 years of experience at a competitor. References that checked out. My HR director approved him without flagging anything unusual. Just another ambitious guy trying to move up. I met Trevor 3 times before he proposed to Olivia. The first time was at a company mixer. He shook my hand with the practiced firmness of corporate climbers, his suit sharper than his skills, his smile wider than his integrity, and I wanted desperately to believe he was worthy of my daughter's laughter. He called me sir, asked polite questions about the company, laughed at the right moments during small talk. The second time was when Olivia brought him to dinner at my place. She glowed when she looked at him. Her hand found his across the table. She laughed at his jokes, leaned into his shoulder, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen since she was little, pure, unguarded joy. Trevor was charming that night, complimentary about the apartment, interested in my work, careful with his words. He talked about his career goals, his plans to move up, his respect for hard work. He seemed fine, adequate, safe enough for my daughter. The third time was when he asked for my blessing to propose. Sir, I love your daughter, he said, standing in my living room with his hands clasped like he was in a job interview. I want to build a life with her. I want to take care of her. I know I'm not perfect, but I promise I'll always put her first. I said yes because Olivia was happy, because she deserved love, because I wanted to trust that I'd raised her well enough to choose a good man. What I didn't see were the red flags. The way Trevor talked over service staff at restaurants. The subtle condescension when he mentioned blue-collar workers like they were somehow less. The overconfidence that masked mediocrity. The way his touch on Olivia's waist seemed more possessive than protective, more claiming than cherishing. I missed it all because I wanted to believe. At work, Trevor was adequate. Not great, not terrible. He managed projects without major disasters, kept his head down, networked with the right people. His performance reviews showed consistent mediocrity masked by charm and good timing. He knew how to take credit for group work, how to deflect blame when things went wrong, how to smile his way through criticism. My managers never flagged him as a problem. They should have. One afternoon, I walked past the break room and heard him on his phone. "Yeah, it's an upgrade," he said, laughing. "Trust me." I didn't think much of it then. Didn't know the context. Didn't realize he was talking about Olivia. About me. About the life he thought he was climbing into. I approved their engagement because Olivia glowed when she said his name. What I didn't know was that behind closed doors, Trevor called me the old nobody and told her she came from trash. The Four Seasons ballroom glowed with everything money could buy except the one thing that mattered: respect. The wedding was perfect on paper. 200 guests. Crystal chandeliers hanging from ceilings so high they seemed to disappear into heaven itself. White roses and orchids everywhere, their scent filling the air like expensive perfume. A string quartet during the ceremony. A 10-piece band for the reception. Food catered by the best chef in Houston. An open bar stocked with bottles that cost more than most people's monthly rent. I wrote the check without hesitation. $60,000 for one day. It didn't matter. Olivia was my only daughter, and if she wanted a Four Seasons wedding, she'd have it. Olivia's white dress caught the chandelier light like captured starlight, and as I walked her down that aisle, I thought about scraped knees I'd bandaged, nightmares I'd chased away, every sacrifice that led to this moment. She was beautiful. Not just the dress and the makeup and the flowers in her hair, but the way she smiled, the way her eyes shone with hope and love and the kind of innocent joy you only get once in your life if you're lucky. I cried walking her down that aisle. Couldn't help it. Every step felt like letting go of something I'd held onto for 28 years. Every step felt like losing her and releasing her at the same time. When I handed her off to Trevor, I looked him in the eye and whispered, "Take care of her." He nodded, smiled, said, "Always, sir." Liar. The ceremony was quick. Vows exchanged. Rings slipped on. Kiss sealed with applause. Then we moved to the ballroom for the reception, and that's where everything fell apart. I sat at my table near the front, nursing a whiskey I wasn't really drinking, watching couples dance and guests laugh and Olivia spin across the floor in Trevor's arms. His hands were on her waist, holding her close, and there was something about the way he touched her that made my stomach tighten. Not protective, not gentle, claiming, possessive. Like she was a trophy he'd won. For a moment, I remembered my own wedding. Linda in a simple dress we'd bought on sale. Dancing in a VFW hall with folding chairs and a DJ who played too much Bon Jovi. Young and hopeful and stupid enough to think love was enough. It wasn't. Love never is when you're building something bigger than yourself. But this was supposed to be different. This was supposed to be Olivia's happy ending. The toasts began. Trevor stood with the microphone, smiled at the crowd, and my world shattered in 90 seconds. Some betrayals come with a knife in the dark. Mine came with a microphone, a champagne toast, and 200 witnesses. Trevor stood at the head table with the microphone in his hand and a smile on his face that looked genuine if you didn't know better. He raised his champagne glass. The room quieted. People turned to listen. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," Trevor began. his voice smooth and practiced. Olivia and I are so grateful to have you all here to celebrate with us. Applause, smiles, standard wedding toast stuff. I also want to talk about something important, he continued, his tone shifting slightly. About rising above humble beginnings, about building something better than what you were given. My chest tightened. Something felt wrong. Olivia comes from, well, let's just say modest circumstances. Trevor looked directly at me, his smile still in place but his eyes cold. Her father, Ron, has worked hard his whole life. Low-level jobs, you know. Manual labor. The kind of work that keeps the lights on but doesn't really get you anywhere. 200 pairs of eyes turned toward me. Ron, I want to thank you for being here tonight, Trevor said, raising his glass higher. I know it's hard for a man like you, someone who's worked those kinds of jobs his whole life, to watch his daughter marry into real success. Ron, you've done your best with what you had. I respect that, but let's be honest. He paused, smiled wider. You're worthless in the world we live in now. The ballroom went dead silent. Olivia deserves better than what you could give her, Trevor continued, his voice louder now, more confident. And I'm here to provide that. I'm here to give her the life she should have always had, the life she deserves. So, Ron, thank you for trying, but I'll take it from here. He laughed, actually laughed, like it was a joke, like he'd just told the funniest story at the party. A few people clapped awkwardly. Most didn't. The room felt frozen, like everyone was holding their breath, unsure if they were supposed to laugh or cry or pretend they hadn't heard what they just heard. The ballroom crystallized into sharp focus, every face turned toward me, every whisper cutting like glass, Trevor's voice echoing off marble walls as he destroyed me with a smile. And my hands shook so hard I had to grip the table edge to stop from falling. I looked at Olivia. She was frozen, her face pale, her mouth open slightly like she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. She looked horrified, embarrassed, but she didn't say anything. She didn't stand up. She didn't defend me. She just sat there. That hurt worse than Trevor's words. My mind flashed to Linda, to the night she left. You're married to nothing that matters, she'd said. Same betrayal, same sting, same realization that the people you love most can hurt you deepest. But this was different. This was public. This was my daughter's wedding. This was 200 people watching me get torn apart by a man who didn't know the first thing about who I was. I stood up slowly. My legs felt weak, but I made them move. I walked out of that ballroom with my head down, past tables of guests who wouldn't meet my eyes, past the band that had stopped playing, past the photographer who lowered his camera like he knew better than to capture this moment. No one stopped me. No one followed. I walked out of that ballroom with my head down, climbed into my rusted truck, and sat in the parking lot looking at the Houston skyline. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I pulled out my phone and made 3 calls that would destroy a man's entire future. Have you ever been publicly humiliated by someone who underestimated you? What did you do? Comment below. Revenge isn't about anger, it's about precision, patience, and knowing exactly where to strike. I sat in that parking lot for 30 minutes with my hands still shaking, watching wedding guests stream past my truck in their designer suits and cocktail dresses. They laughed. They hugged. They talked about how beautiful the ceremony was, how touching the vows were, how perfect everything looked. None of them knew what had just happened. Or maybe they did, and chose to pretend they didn't. Either way, they were completely unaware that I'd just set in motion a cascade that would erase a man from the only world that mattered to him. My mind wasn't foggy anymore. The hurt was still there, raw and sharp like a fresh wound, but underneath it, something else was growing. Something cold and focused. I wasn't crying. I wasn't yelling. I was strategizing. I pulled out my phone.